All right, so let's get the meeting started. So Matt, you suggest we identify roles?
I was just suggesting while we were sort of
Yeah.
twiddling our thumbs.
Sure.
Yeah.
We should. I can help to co-facilitate. Glad to share that role with somebody in terms of discussion, talk, voice.
I'll do that with you.
Co-facilitating. So Colin and
I can't take notes and
I have a back
Think
issue
I
on
can't do
notes. I have back issues, so I can't be doing that. So I'm going to move. Do we have any volunteers, or we can just gather at the end, put it together?
I don't mind.
You don't mind, Benjamin?
No,
Just
it's cool.
scribbling a few things. I think scribbling's fine.
Oh no, I'll use my computer.
Really?
It's faster for
You're
me.
comfortable with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Plus, we got to email it anyway. Why do double work, right?
Now there's someone who's efficient.
Recording stopped.
That's us. It's still the. Right, so we were just going to go around and introduce ourselves. Is that it, Matt, in terms of roles? Do we have anything else?
I don't think
That's it.
I think that's it.
So I just thought it'd be good to know people more and more as we do more and more work over the next year together. So I'm Brent. I'm at San Jose State, and I have been a teacher in high school in New York City, where I got very passionate about performance assessment, graduation by portfolio. What I saw to be the deepest roots of the work that we did with K through 12, which was feedback and formative assessment. And so I come with a long commitment, and then I'm trying to figure out later on, when I adopted some other strategies and expertise to unpack assessment, what people have been saying about the space of what I would call alternative formative assessment in more traditional ways. So I worked on the Cal TPA design team, so I've been responsible partly for some piece of this TPA to one of them. And I remember that in those meetings, we had a lot of emphasis on formative assessment and feedback. And really, I was passionate about that piece. So I'm here just to kind of remind myself of why I came, which is to remember that TPA, if it's going to intersect with that, there's a lot we can think about and help to make it come alive. Sorry, long preamble, but it's been a long journey.
yeah, it's been a long one for me too. Something to do with our age, maybe. I don't know. But it's been a long journey. I actually taught in a school right next door to Dylan Williams. I know Dylan very well. So really, I have a lot of experience in schools, in high school, at the age of 18. What I wonder about is how we utilize formative assessment in higher education, and in particular at TPA. I mean, I think the envisioning of formative assessment was not for university students. It was for high school, middle, elementary, middle and high school. That's where the language comes from. And I just wonder how we change the language for the work that we're doing, whether the old language actually fits with it. So that's why I signed up for this one.
I just want to say I really appreciate everyone being really kind of open and honest, because I think if we put that on the table, we'll work together really well. Like, it'll help a lot. So thank you.
I'm Elisa Brown. I'm from San Francisco Unified School District. And I noticed that I am the only teacher in this table. So,
Currently, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm excited to be working with you all, and also excited to bring a teacher's perspective in terms of the ideas and concepts of formative. That's why I joined this group, is because I feel like there's a lot of ways to expand that, especially within TPA as it currently stands. So I'm excited to get to know everybody's thoughts about that. Recording in progress.
Ben Odell. I work for County Office of Education in teaching credentialing. Prior to this, I had 20 years. Classroom, site admin, district admin, different roles like that. I ended up choosing formative. I actually liked a lot of the different areas, and I was not necessarily worried about which group I got put into. But I do really appreciate formative in nature specifically, because I think that at the heart of it, there's so much research that says where students grow the most, right? They grow the most from guided practice with feedback, right? That is literally what all the research really done in education says. And so I think if there was a way of creating a TPA that was more formative based, that we would not only retain teachers into the schools, but we'd also be able to support their growth. So that's really at the heart of why I'm here.
Thank you, Matt Wallace, former teacher. I still feel like I'm a teacher educator now. And I am here, one, because I have an interest in assessment, but more importantly, I chose this one because this is perhaps the area I've struggled with most, working with teacher candidates and trying to have, we in my institution use TPA, but previously used PACT. And it never seemed to motivate learning in a way that you think formative should. So it was really more a game of how do I get the score to pass at best. At worst, it was, not very motivating or inspiring, really negative teacher identity affirming in many ways. So I struggle with it the most. I thought I have maybe the most to learn by joining this group. And offer too, sorry.
I'm Tori. I'm at UC Santa Barbara. I'm the director of teacher education there, but started as a classroom teacher, middle school and high school English and history for about a decade and a half before I left to join the ranks of the university as a teacher educator. And I chose formative because I feel like in our program, we have really wonderful formative experiences for our candidates where they're getting a lot of feedback and they're really growing significantly in their practice from that. And then it feels like they just run into a brick wall when they do a TPA. And it's like
recording stopped.
As much as like I think some really good instruction happens around a TPA where we're able to sit down with video and ask some guiding questions, and that becomes a formative experience. The assessment itself doesn't do that for them, and that's why I chose formative. But kind of like you, Benjamin, I could have done any group. They're all interesting to me.
But it really sounds to me like we have a wealth of perspectives, and I'm sure there's more that's going to emerge. So we have our charge. I haven't led a group like this in a while. Co-led. Is anyone have co-led with me, Colin? Is there a way for us to, again, keep it real, but also quote unquote get it done? It sounds like we have from Adam's charge the general working definition, right? Like sort of the goal of this to come up with some attributes. So
I also think it's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, looking at the other definitions that people are looking at.
Yeah.
We have way more feedback from the last time we met. The comments on.
Let's review those.
But maybe that's a good place.
I think it's a great place to start. I like to look at what we have to do and then like to get there. So attributes we have to get to, but let's play.
Do you think that was a product of this being one of the first things to be discussed in groups, or just because of the provocative nature of formative assessment, or formative in nature?
I think because I think it's the biggest issue that we face regarding with a performance assessment is because the performance, and I mean someone said, and I think it's wrong, that it has to be done at the end. Well, no one says it has to be done at the end, but it doesn't make sense to do it that much earlier because people aren't ready for it.
Right.
And if it is done towards the end, then where's that space and how does that formative the formative piece actually happen when students are actually just about to walk out the door?
So I'm going to gently go with your suggestion that we actually review these. I like to read them out loud. I think it's worth us just stewing in what other people in this whole group thought. So does anyone start? Yeah, please.
Before we start, and that is, I just wonder about the nature of the ability for the assessment to actually be formative when it is also serving as a gatekeeper into the profession. And so that's just something
I love that we all want to jump in already because I totally agree with I got 100 things to say like that. But can we take a little bit of space just to hear what other people wrote, and then we are going to go at it. So do you want to read? I want to just pass it around like group one notes. What do people write?
Group one notes: formative in nature. Definition concerns with formative. Rating of the TPA should be able to take feedback and resubmit applying feedback. How formative is video and teacher prep program. is the preparation for TPA formative and teacher prep programs, ongoing constructive low stakes.
So group one had a few things. Does anyone else want to take group two and just sort of, probably need to enunciate too so people can hear us and then over there.
There was two, sorry to interrupt. Ben.
Yeah.
I don't, the digital version of this, there was also a response from, what I'm assuming was a Cal TPA rep and an Ed TPA rep,
Okay.
outlining how they are thinking these TPAs are formative.
Let's get
in
to that,
nature.
right?
I don't
you
see
wanna
it
do
here though, so I don't know.
So we'll make a note to ourselves that we need to read out what they say, which would be our outside reps, right?
I think those were the, maybe it's in
Yeah, it
the
had all
back.
three
Yeah.
models.
So I'm gonna keep flowing with, I just want to hear what other people
Yeah, let's
said
do
from
it.
our own group to remind myself rather than run to other folks outside of our process yet. So I'll just read group two then. I don't think that the TPA is designed to be formative. Formative is always happening, even assessments at the end. Formative implies a specific feedback loop, continuous implementation that's built on itself. The only feedback that candidates receive is a score, which is not formative in nature. The performance assessment is not formative in its current form. It is high stakes and summative in nature. Tori, I don't know if you wrote that, but yeah, but there's definitely stuff here, right, that kind of echoes what we probably are going to say. We give candidates a plan for induction, but TPA results are rarely included in this plan, partly because we do not know why they receive a particular score. We are looking at how this assessment is impacted by persons who is assessing it, who are the assessors, how did the assessor bias impact student results. The same material can get different scores, can be a 3 and then goes down to a 2. There is variability across programs. Passing rates are different across programs. Interesting. I don't know if that's about formative, but somebody wrote that. So, I mean, again, maybe people feel it's tedious to listen to all these notes. There's a lot of them, so we could definitely skip them and read them on our own. But there seemed to be among our entire work group, outside of this smaller group, a lot of concerns about whether this can be formative, right? So I'm just wondering if we could try, Matt and Colin and everybody. Our goal is to read what other people say. Did we find that other thing on what the TPA people? Let's read that out loud. What are those folks saying? It's lengthy. Is there like a paragraph or a summary or an executive summary? Not really. So it's we got to read it somehow.
So each model sponsor has their own.
Each model sponsor has their own. Okay. Well,
Is that because you're going to put that?
Oh, I didn't even see the
maybe
That's why-
that would make sense.
Is that why it's later in the?
Right. So we'll get to that
Yeah.
tomorrow to vet our own vetting.
Yes, yeah.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we're good, then I think here's a thought that we could throw out there. Do we want to, before we run to attributes of formative, which I think are fairly easy to generate, or we could start here. What is not formative?
Recording stopped.
Is there a way to play with that concept negatively? What is not formative in nature? I mean, just from all the notes we have in our own brains, we're whirling around. I'm kind of wondering if people have opinions about that. I know these notes say they do. Or would people rather go to positive, start with what we think formative is?
Non-examples?
Examples
What do
too?
you think?
No, a non-example, sorry.
Non-example.
In your classroom,
Concept of
what's
formative.
the,
Yeah, exactly.
what's the cutoff between formative? Or the difference between formative and summative when you're using it with your students?
Yeah, I was looking at group four. Group four has dictionary and Cambridge and Merriam dictionary. That's these pieces. But when you were talking, you're starting to mention attributes and like time. That was interesting. When does formative happen? So I think that's the question you're asking,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
Is anything
as
so?
long as, yeah, I would say formative can be as long well, okay, so in the classroom you have like the idea of like the just in case scaffolds versus the just in time scaffolds, right? So you don't give things to students just in case they need them because that's lowering rigor for students, right? So like that, I kind of think of things with formative in that way, it's like saying, the TPA needs to be just in time for teachers. So like when they're ready,
Yeah.
right? How do we know that? Like, we really have to have knowledge of teachers, I guess, in order to know, like, are they ready to demonstrate their knowledge in a proficient kind of way? But yet, do we allow them the space to be able to make mistakes and be able to learn and grow from that? So like, when is a very
When, yeah,
elusive concept in a TPA, right? Because everybody develops and grows it whenever, whenever they can and do.
well, I think that was Colin's point about to imagine that everything only happens when the scores are given is a little bit not
Yeah.
accurate, because there's all sorts of processes going on to build the TPA. There's all sorts of interactions happening, including with classroom students, believe it or not, in
I
that
could even-
process.
Yeah, I could
Yeah.
even make the case for, having a win be more towards the beginning, even. Like, if you have a chance to give something, even if somebody is not fully developed or ready yet, but there's a process to give feedback. We teach whatever that is in the university world. That could be
Good
formative.
classroom teachers give a pre-assessment before they start the unit to know what, so what I need to do to get them to where they are. So there's an opening up right from the very beginning. And that's the first piece of formative assessment that a classroom teacher would do, isn't it? The sort
Yeah.
of pre-assessment of their knowledge about Russia as a country or
Well,
whatever it
There's
is.
also there's also an opportunity in there to think about the TPA kind of being a strengths-based adaptive kind of piece of like being able to say, okay, teacher, this is what you scored on this piece. What are your strengths? What are you going to continue to grow in? And then also, coaching or whatnot to be able to great. I think somebody put in here something about bridging gaps.
From the math framework.
Yeah.
About bridging gaps. So if I can maybe zoom out and maybe try
Yeah.
to capture what you're saying, it seems like formative is dynamic. It's not static. If we're thinking of examples and non-examples. So that, I appreciate you talking about the room to make mistakes and revise. I think that speaks to how it's dynamic. Versus something that's just like a one and done, and that's where it is. And if it happens at the end, it's sort of little time to have it be more than static. But I would also add to that too, about the making mistakes in Ed TPA, I don't know how it works with some of the others. You're penalized $300 for making a mistake. If you don't pass it, you've got to pay again to do this thing. That is not appreciating, valuing, promoting learning from mistakes, revising your thinking, or any sort of that dynamic piece that would be part of a formative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can be really hardcore about my field. I've been in it for a while. Scores aren't formative.
Yeah.
This is again like, well, yeah, of course they are. If I get a 1 or a 2, that I've learned something. Well, if you believe in everything you've just said, and everyone that's just talking about, the 1 might be a pre-assessment, but in reality, the 1 isn't feedback. So we could just say that one of the inherent tensions, I think, with the formative nature is at the end it's getting scored and there's a consequential penalty, which may circumvent any feedback that was ever conceived of being useful. I want to look at it from another way. That's an easy thing for me to say, the score thing. I think a harder thing for me to admit to, having taught the Cal TPA as a teacher with teachers, Elisa, in my program, and cooperating teachers. The cooperating teachers that have the work embedded in their classroom where the student teacher is doing the video work, they may not see this as formative in nature at all. And in that sense, the formative for me in nature means that the stakeholders and the participants have to kind of believe that this is more than a sit and get one and done. And so I'm bringing the beliefs, I'll put that. There has to be a belief among stakeholders that we're doing something that is all the things we mentioned. And right now, I don't necessarily see that. That's an implementation problem. It may not be a natural problem with TPA, but it is a problem.
I don't want to put words in George, but I was interpreting what you said as the one that we use, the Ed TPA, provides guidance for us. The feedback loop, the formative assessment happens from the beginning of the very first video observation that they do. The one they submit and the one that's going to be submitted for a TPA is not the first one. It's not the first to use that criteria. I mean, to use all the criteria, it might be the first one, but to actually use pieces of the criteria and the rubrics and all of that. So the process of feedback from us is massive at that point.
And here's where we're going to run into a lot of trouble, not in our group per se, I think for the whole project. Stanford STEP, San Jose State, we have an outstanding teacher prep program in the Cal State system.
So do they.
And so do you, but that's UC. So I'm going to give UC its credit in a minute, and also math program. The thing is, though, that we all have different approaches, even perhaps, to what we consider formative in nature based on assumptions about program. So I would completely agree with Colin. I embedded in my course and our phase 2 student teaching micro events that are formative in nature that never get scored by TPA scores.
Yeah.
They're the building blocks before you do the final submission. But look at the talk. The talk is now centered around my program, my implementation, what I do. And that's our challenge. Like, how do you do formative in nature when you find out there's a lot of variation in how people would even take that up?
Absolutely. And I mean, some of that university have 1,000 students who go through the program.
Programs too.
We have different cohorts throughout the year, 500, whatever it is, you know, that sort of number. We don't have that number, and I don't think you do either in Santa Barbara, do you? No.
But I also,
And that number restricts that feedback loop. I mean, that's, you know, if you've got a class of 32 to 35 teaching them history, the feedback you can give that class is not the same as if you've got 15. It's just a logistic. I mean, it's just a truth.
I also was just going to throw in, so it's not what you were just talking about is about what programs do, right?
Exactly.
And don't get me wrong, like we need to embed it and we need, right? But at the same time, that's not what the ed code says. Those are two very different things. The ed code says the assessment must be formative in nature.
Well, so that when we get to when you start reading what the representatives wrote about that was one of my takeaways from ed TPAs. It seems like they're completely offloading the formative to what the programs are doing and the instructors. And the Cal TPA a little less so, where it's actually trying to make it, I think.
At least
because there's 2 cycles.
Yeah. And I didn't get a chance to read fast. I totally didn't even know it was in the packet, but I'll get to it.
Right, fast is the black box.
Yeah.
I can give you the fast point on Cal TPA because that's what our program does, right? Cycle 1, cycle 2, completely different, measuring different standards.
Right. Exactly.
So it's not a cycle where it's building on the last one. Like in my mind, when I hear formative in nature, I think of what you both kind of called out on. Here's a pre-assessment, here's a post-assessment. Let's measure the growth between, right? Like that is my definition of formative is what are we doing with feedback and how are we growing people? Not a one-off on how did it go, because that's how I was taught. And I recognize people have different definitions, but that's what I was taught with summative is, are you doing anything with information? Are you changing instruction? Are you learning more from what you got or not, right?
So I think this is like, I want to dive so deep into that, I'm going to stop because it's good stuff. The Cal TPA has a specific assessment cycle that would put you in the ability to tell student teachers formative is what's going to get you a 3. So even the act of the teaching, performing, let's say, Matt, in a way that feels inauthentic, at least you're still directing them towards, if you're not doing assessment for learning in cycle 2, if you give a test, if you give a quiz, that's not going to work. So alignment, that's the word I want to also note. The alignment between TPAs, I believe, and this question are also up for grabs, how deeply they align with formative in nature. We assume that they're all the same. I don't think so. But back to our question of ed code, right? And attributes even. Like, here's a really provocative response. I don't think any tool in itself has embedded inside of a DNA called formative. Like there's nothing in an assessment tool that in and of itself is formative or summative, really. It's how you use it. So now we're back to ed code can say that, but uses are everything and they link to implementation challenges. But so let's put uses down. You know, uses are going to matter. Can I give us some good news? I think with the help of this and Ben, we've actually got a lot of attributes sort of happening.
I do have one question.
Yeah, let's do one.
I don't know that it needs to go on here, but when we're talking about ed code and formative in nature, ed code also has, and what we were talking about what our programs do, ed code also has like program embedded. And so that I don't, like, is it the assessment itself has to be formative in nature, or is it the entire,
Embedded this.
right?
If that's a
So
word.
that,
Yeah, that
like,
is.
'cause when we're talking about our program, I'm like, oh, cool, we're definitely meeting that part, and I could have embedded, I think, that.
So
the
there's a
assessment
tension at
itself-
least.
Yeah, there's a tension.
There's a tension at least.
But to your point though, I mean, there are, right, it is a process, not a product.
Yeah.
But there are some things that lend themselves to more or less formative in nature. Like if you have a multiple choice question, that's not going to give you very much any sort of data or evidence that really would help one who wants to use it formatively do so. So there has to be something that would elicit enough information that would be useful to whoever's going to do the formative work.
If we zoom out, the designers, the grand creators, the foremothers and fathers of this whole work probably agreed. And that's why they didn't want a multiple choice, as Linda might call
Right.
bubbling test for teachers to become licensed in the state of California. So
And
I
I
think
guess,
we'll,
so I mean, I
so
know
that
that
argument
ours,
that can be made that way.
yeah, I know,
yes.
I know, what I'm not arguing is for, we should have some multiple choice tests that our
Right.
teachers take. But I guess what I'm saying is there might be, even if we just look at the TPAs that are available to us, some might be more or less supportive or prompting or promoting, I don't know if that's the right word, but some that are be more or less helpful if we're thinking about how to use a TPA to be formative in nature.
Yeah, I would,
No, go on.
again, my two worlds are Stanford and State. Those are the two universities that we interact with at the San Francisco Urban Teacher Residency Program.
You have one of my
And-
supervisees.
And yeah, and I would say that my experience, and again, I'm fairly new to this world, so 2 years in with this. My experience has only been with a TPA. So when
Yeah.
I heard about Fresno's
Yeah,
time
the one they
chunked
made. Yeah.
whatevers, I was like, whoa, that is cool.
Yeah.
I thought that was a really, because the words that are, a lot of the statements I hear from student teachers is, okay, that, we're just having an ed TPA party. We're all gonna sit down and figure it out kind of thing. And again, it becomes very formative, summative. So like, that's really what I would love to learn more about is how do you make TPAs a true learning experience?
I think there might be, I appreciate that, and I didn't have time to click on all the links from it fast, but I think there's probably a lot there to learn about formative.
Just to honor Margaret and others who were mentioned by Adam, and where she worked very hard to get, as well as other folks, some definitions. I think it's worth remembering that there's bodies, professional bodies across this country that have struggled with the difference between summative, formative, and interim. And I just think it's interesting if you read, I always teach my students this, no matter whether they're grad students, doctoral programs, or in teacher ed programs. It's important to know that some people fought hard and they fought for this. An assessment process, formative assessment, an assessment process used by teachers and students, which is interesting because here we're talking about teacher educators and teacher candidates, right? Kind of your point. During instruction, that's a huge, huge, huge delineator in this world that provides feedback to adjust ongoing teaching and learning with the goal of improving student achievement. In this case, would be TPA, intended instructional outcomes. Formative in nature is a good way to go because we wouldn't want to say this is a formative assessment. It's not. It's not embedded in instruction in a way that guarantees ongoing feedback for every aspect of a TPA. There really is a part where it breaks off and says, it's now yours to be scored by an external authority. So I just was thinking about that, like formative in nature is a way to get around the fact that it's not formative assessment, which is fine. So if we go to the fact that it's really a summative assessment, then can we go back from that, the formative in nature piece we want? It's a thought puzzle, I think.
That's
a good
really,
question.
it's super interesting. Like right now, what I'm trying to do with SFDTR is and try to get the teachers to give out a student experience survey in which they do coaching and they get the the feedback from students in their classrooms, but it kind of makes me wonder, I'm like, that would be super interesting. What if TPAs had something that gathered student voice experience? I mean, I'm not sure if they already do have some
Someone had, I think there is something somewhere.
some piece of that. But
There's probably, yeah.
I think it was mentioned actually before.
Yeah. So, I mean, we can write down attributes easily. We'll be done in 2 seconds. Like we got the attributes of it, but is that the genuine work? Like, is the work saying, we think,
Well, I think it's, I was really interested they used the word formative, like you picked up on, like we've all picked up on, I think, use the word in nature.
yeah,
Right. In nature, what does that actually mean in nature? To me, it means that everything can be formative to some extent, depending on wherever it is or whatever, however it's used, which is the point that people are making. But formative in nature means that to me, it means that that's at the core of the activity. So that goes to the core of what we're doing, rather than just like, it can be.
as an add-on.
Yeah, it's not, in nature, I mean, it doesn't have to be 100%, but actually the majority of the work around it is formative. And going back to one of the things you said, which Dylan William and Paul Black would have said when they first wrote the paper around it, is that once we give it a number, it's not formative. Once we assign that number, that's all the students care about. That's all they want to talk about to their other friends. Yeah, what number did you get?
Yeah, there's been some small-scale studies about
so
that.
So once we
too,
give that, loads. I mean,
Yeah.
once we give that to high school students, that's my own experience as high school students, then they don't really care about anything else. It becomes a number. So we have to think about much more, lengthier, more expensive ways of giving that feedback. It can't just be a
Well, not only that, but the number doesn't give any direction on what to do or how to improve.
So thank you, Matt, because the key thing is you see me fighting for it. My own work is next steps.
Yeah.
What's the next step that comes out of the tool? Like, how does the tool in nature guide people to next steps, specific, targeted feedback?
Yeah.
And I think that's where the field is now, and no one's really dancing around that. We all know if feedback's not embedded and not next steps oriented, what's formative about it? And that feedback could be self-assessment. That could be peer assessment. I've always wondered why we have peers. I've had my students help each other with video to quote unquote, not score the video, but to identify where the progress marker is, what can be done next. But again, that's anecdotal. That's one program doing something. To make it for the whole system, we have to ask, where are those next step guidance leaders? And I love that just in case, just in time is a great frame for like, that would be formative in nature if those affordances were there.
I know that we're talking about, we're trying to broaden it out from individual programs, but I imagine that we all have at some point some sort of peer review type thing. We certainly do it over the video that they do. They sit down, explain their video to their peers, and their peers give them feedback. We don't actually get the peers to score it on a rubric, but we do have, they do look at the criteria, and so they're doing that. But it makes me think that there needs to be like some sort of handbook, some sort of guidance to programs and under the accreditation process. So, and I know there are questions around that. What do you do to support students? But maybe there should be more that comes to every program. So this is sort of an expectation that if you're delivering these, then you need to do, or it's best, or we advise, or whatever the language, I don't know, about ways to do things in your program.
Like video-based discussions from Orco stuff, or like lesson study.
I mean, like a resource pool. Yeah, I mean, there's a library approach. You can do digital library.
You're looking quizzical, Ben.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just also thinking about a lot of the sections on the TPA could be met by checkboxes. The nature of certain tests may or may not lend themselves to formative nature based off of like how the test is laid out. So like you just called out videos, right? So I know, for instance, I can tell you off the top of my head the things they must do within 5-minute clips on the video. And it's a, did you do it or did you not do it? And that is what controls where you are on the rubric, which once again, to me, does not seem formative in nature of a like, did you do this or not? Do you see what I'm saying? It's not did you do this well? How well did you do this?
No,
It's not moving.
dichotomous without a whole lot of in
Yeah.
between. Yeah, it's
And
did you do or did you not?
And
Yeah,
so
it's
to me,
ironic.
those I think that's probably the number one reason from
Yeah.
my vantage point that I struggle
Yeah.
with like the formative in nature thing. Yeah, I mean the feedback they get's not great, but why isn't it great? It's a did you do it, did you not do it? There's not really a whole lot more to say. And so that's where maybe I struggle with formative in
Checklist.
nature.
Yeah, so maybe a summative. Yeah. Did you want to say more? Physical too, without looking physical.
Well, I'm curious. So Colin put up an idea that I'm wondering if we're all in agreement on. The formative in nature means at its core, the assessment is for formative purposes, not summative purposes. Is that something we all want to co-sign as an attribute of formative in nature, or is that?
Can we type it out? I have to look
Say
at
that
yeah,
one
say
more
it
time,
again.
did you say?
Well, so it's not my ideas. I think what Colin was
No,
saying.
you said it much better.
Let's just co-author it.
Yeah.
When you say performative, that means somebody is acting within it, right? Like they
So
have to do
so
something
as I'm
with it.
understanding it, we need to come up. We have to define
Yeah.
this construct, formative in nature. What does that mean? We're going to define it in a way. And Colin was saying, well, when I hear formative in nature, to me, at its core, that means that this assessment is designed for more formative than summative purposes.
Oh, okay.
You're contrasting it.
Yeah.
More formative than something.
Right. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah,
So
that's
is
how
that-
I
Oh,
would-
my bad.
yeah,
I thought I
that's
heard
what
I mean, that's
performative
provocative.
second.
And I'm bringing that up because when you read all the comments, I mean, I think that's when we initially started. A lot of people are saying, no, it's not formative in nature; it's summative in nature. So, if that's something that
Where we are now, it's summative in nature.
yeah, right, yeah.
So
So
we
if
tweak.
we're on,
Which doesn't mean it's totally summative.
Right.
It means the same as it, that's the main aim.
yeah, right.
Is that it's summative.
So let's capture that again. That was.
I can't do it 3 times. No,
I know,
this-
right? But we can help.
You said something similar to it. I think that I can connect to it, but you were talking about process versus product, and I think that's kind of the same concept. I think that you're talking about being more formative than summative, right?
Mhm.
But let's just call out the words because I kind of like just
Yeah, that's
formative and summative. Let's make sure that's in
Yeah.
there. So what was the sentence? The sentence was really sweet and
Is that-
simple. It was
Well, I
the TPA
has to be more formative.
has to be
They're
more
formative in
formative
nature.
in nature.
To be-
An essential attribute is that it, at its core, it is designed for formative purposes more so than summative.
More so than summative
Yeah.
More so
purposes.
than some.
I think that's a great contrast because it sets up right away. Like, what do you think?
How much more is more so
But
percentage
yeah,
wise?
that's
51 to
50
49,
yeah,
right?
50 point.
That's for the CTC to figure
I
out.
think that goes back to my initial question is, can you be a gatekeeper and consultant?
Right.
So
Well,
it's-
coach. Can you be a coach and a gatekeeper?
Right. I think that's a tension. I don't know the answer. to
So
that,
it
but
I don't
I
mean
would
baseball
argue,
coach.
you can't- I don't know if you can be a gatekeeper and also be formative.
Right.
you can with the feedback. But this is where you are now.
And there's no
You can't
improvement.
open the gate at the moment.
Mhm.
But if you do, these are the areas that you need to work on in these ways. So if you follow sort of the standard wording of like a feedback loop or whatever, and then if you do these things and then can show it, then that
Mhm.
that will happen. It needs,
I think,
Ideally.
Can I
Yeah,
can I
yeah,
just
yeah.
can I step?
Ideally, but
Yeah.
there
yeah, you're more
may be-
likely to.
Well, ideally, but what comes up in my mind is again, is there, a bias and whatnot that also
That-
comes up in my brain
Yeah,
around.
and I was going to just add, and then I'll be quiet because I'm saying way too much. So, is that, and it's a quote I think from Stiggins, where he talks about equity and feedback. Is that our most disadvantaged students are the ones that benefit the most from feedback and formative assessments, and he statistically, in his survey, proved that, and so. We're talking in terms of an equity issue as well, that we need to give that feedback to ensure that our most disadvantaged students do get the feedback that they need, so that the next time, so that the gate isn't closed, it's swinging at the moment.
well,
right?
but I think there has to be an assumption that you're going to do something with this feedback. And so like with
Mhm.
Ed TPA, that's not the assumption. If you get it and you pass, then great, you go on. And
Right.
as a gatekeeper to everyone else, unless they get inspired. So I think if we're gonna go with that, I would say that if it's a process and we're all agreeing that formative assessment more than summative, then as by design, it has to be a process. We're expected to get feedback and do something, improve.
So one could say in which feedback is articulated, transparent, user-friendly, and actually taken up
Yeah.
and actionable. So there we're back to really, I think, drilling down deeper.
And
Can I just
Oh,
have this
we'll take
gatekeeper
whatever time you want to
concept?
give us. So
You guys need-
you're gonna
do you
have
guys
to
need
give
some more
us a-
time?
Yeah, we do.
Okay. Can you be the
What time do you want me to?
what would you say to like 2:45?
15
more
minutes?
Yeah.
You think
Yeah.
you can hammer out because remember, you're going to bring it back to the whole group and then
And we're doing our definition and
critical
then
attributes.
our
And the
attributes.
attributes,
So we can do the
I
attributes
think we've
fast.
got a lot.
But the
All right.
definition,
so we're going
So-
to do 2:45 then? All right. And you can send me.
so I think we just got somewhere else.
Oh, okay.
If we're typing stuff, Ben, I think we got somewhere else. We were sort of looping towards,
So I got formative in nature and essential attribute as core is designed for more formative purposes than summative purposes. We were talking about, can you be formative in a gatekeeper? We talked about bias. We talked about most disadvantaged students get support through formative assessments and that we have to do something with the feedback. Feedback is articulated, transparent, user-friendly, and actionable.
can we move that last part towards the front? Because I
Oh,
do
yeah,
think-
that's not all the definition. Those are just
Exactly.
notes.
You know why I
Sorry.
say that? Because I think if we start talking about bias and gatekeeping, we're now in a whole nother set of discussions.
Yes,
And
I know.
I don't think those are the charge. Those are effects and outcomes that come from this design or this approach. I guess I want to say that because, why? Why do I care about that? I think
The validity group.
I
should
think,
care
I
about
think,
it.
I think, yeah, that is sort of a validity group and maybe also rate of reliability stuff. I just feel like we are so right on to go where Matt sort of took us, which is to contrast the two and then to say, well, what would it be to be more formative? And to be more formative, it would be the things we've said, which it currently really isn't. Is that enough? That's enough, right? And then we can let this whole team for next year figure out how to bring it to that place.
And then an attribute is
With
the
guidebooks and-
equity, it's the equity piece. That would go probably not in the definition, but in an attribute.
Equity focused.
Yeah, it has to be equity focused, which means that students need written,
Which we got a lot of stuff here.
actionable feedback.
So if we're gonna do attributes, we got that right there, equity focused. We all agree that's important. It's an
Mhm.
attribute. We've got, just in case, just in time. I mean, again, that's the timeliness question. When does it come?
Yeah, I would say not so much with the just in case.
Okay, so
because
just in
that-
time?
Yeah,
Yeah.
just in time
Just in time?
supports, yeah.
Okay. User, we talked about user friendly, but we also mentioned, actionable, right? Because again, it's great to stick it all out there, but if it's not gonna be taken up by the student teacher, what does it mean to follow formative in nature for the student teacher? We said strengths-based and adaptive. Again, so if we're doing differentiation and equity, we want to think, where's the strength of this candidate right now and what do they need to make that next leap in that TPE area? The feedback would have to be targeted and strengths-based. There. We just said things like coaching, dynamic. I think those are all pretty good aspirations. Revise, we mentioned revise, revise, and that's like a big ask. How many of the people in this system want to help students revise anything? I've seen it in higher ed. It's disgusting to me how few people take the time as professors or educators to do that in higher ed. So I just call myself out, they just don't do that work, and this is work.
I don't think we use the term low stakes. but I
Low
see it in
stakes,
here,
nice.
and I think
Mhm.
that's
Put it there, low stakes.
attribute.
So low stakes.
Such a pain.
That's a hard.
That goes
Yeah,
back
good
to
luck with that.
gatekeeping.
No, I have to log into my
And-
CTC profile while, and I just have to sign out my other profile, so now I'm losing my notes. Like, there's no
Oh.
good way of doing this, right? Because I have to be on the CTC when to turn it in, is what you just told me.
You're okay. We'll get it to them.
Cool.
As low stakes, I think, isn't just about gatekeeping. I think also goes to Matt's point about the expense of the exam, right? Like that's a high stake, is $300 for the.
I was gonna push back, I'd like to do that sometimes Socratically. Gatekeeping is an interesting way to say it. I would then want to have guide on the side as the contrast. Because I'm more in the guide on the side, old school way of thinking. Like when we talk to my students, I'm saying, one of the things you're doing when you're assessing with students versus against them or around them or positioning them, you're actually a guide. So do we need less gatekeeping, but what do we need more of?
You mean gatekeeping by the scorers?
Yeah, okay.
Not the institution.
Not the
No,
Okay.
not the institution.
So gatekeeping as the
Gatekeeping
score.
as the score and also as the standard, right? You have to pass a TPA credential, so that's it. I'm not saying we shouldn't have a gatekeeping mechanism.
No.
That's a whole other discussion. Say, can't be formative.
Right, right.
I appreciate your point, Colin, about yes, if there's opportunity for you.
When I think about, so I was also an English teacher way back in the day, right? And I'd assign an essay, right? And then it'd go out and get scored. And don't get me wrong, you're putting a number to it. But at the same time, the whole idea of the feedback is that they would then make it a process to revise until it gets to the point where it's at the level that shows, right? And that was the process that I used, at least in my classroom.
So blended, really.
Right. And every single essay, I can tell you, like, I'd say over 80% of my students revise their essays every single time because they were shooting for proficiency, right?
So formative in nature. Matt, we need to add furthermore to formative in nature. Do we keep bias, non-bias? Do we say that? Do we?
I think we can leave bias out because
We can maybe just mention that we
the
thought about it, but we didn't.
That it relates to things that are right next to this, like it's all, because this is all connected. All these other ones are connected to this one, right? Formative in nature has to be connected, appropriate for beginning teachers. How can you give good feedback if you don't know levels of teaching, right?
There's a couple of things with a TPA. One is the task 4 requires candidates to actually assess student learning and
The task 4. TPA, is it 4?
A TPA, yeah. It's either
for multiple
math
subjects.
with
Oh,
literacy
it's like
task.
a multiple.
For
Sorry.
multiple
Sorry.
subjects,
Sorry.
not
Sorry.
single.
I'm like,
Sorry.
all these years.
I
Said elementary one only.
Yeah, multiple, yeah.
Yeah.
It's all
Yeah.
Sorry, I
Uh,
interrupted.
Yeah.
I was scared.
But I think it requires our candidates to do different.
No wonder yours were failing.
Which is to look at student
Yeah.
work,
Right.
to analyze their performance based on their student work, and then to plan a re-engagement lesson, right? And so like they demonstrate their ability to do that as a teacher, but they're not getting that opportunity themselves as learners. So
Yeah, I was trying to bring that up earlier too, but I think one of the things I've seen happen over the years is drift away from the spirit, at least for Cal TPA, of what we were trying to undo with Ed TPA, which is we had seen a lot of rubrics being thrown at students and then people writing down percentages and then saying differentiation means that I categorized my students. And we were seeing less of the micro assistance, right? You need to balance, right? You need some kind of a framework for the evaluation for that student practice, but you also need them to be like, and what are you showing that you do with that assessment information? It was ironic that it was becoming kind of like the problem of the state test. They were really seeing this as, I just got to show that I gave something out, an assignment, I scored it. I then took what the percentages were, because there's like high, medium, low, and then I, sort of like did one thing. And I don't know if that's formative in nature, because it could really just be micro-summative. Sorry?
Or leveling.
Or level.
With students, yeah.
If they go back and use it, then it's still formative in its nature. If there's an opportunity given them to go, it might not be the best practice, but it's formative.
It's a safe practice.
And it's a formative process, isn't it?
Yeah, okay.
Even if you're only using like a three level rubric that meets the standard, approaching standard, exceeds the standard,
And they bake that in, and I have to say, like, I totally disagree with that decision, because to me, it's like simplifying beyond any kind of reality, but we have to go with the design. So at TPA, is it the same 3 levels? 5 that way, but in terms of putting the student work in categories for standard 4, task 4, are they asked to do a rubric that's like a 3?
No, they can do any rubric.
They can do any kind of rubric they want. Got it.
Any
Gotcha.
kind of rubric.
Sorry.
No, I just, this is a what if out of the brain, because I know, like, the time issue. I know, I realize that you have to have like a time where this assessment has to be cut off and people have to get into, or not into teaching with whatnot, but then there's also this interesting like continuum as it blends into like induction, right? So like the induction is, I just kind of learned a little bit more about the connection between that, because they kind of have this as a, you know, like a checkbox and an ILP kind of thing. But yeah, now I'm really beginning to think about like what is, you know, that is a piece of the formative piece around, you know, whatever you did with your program in your universities. Now you're having a continuation into induction, and then just a what if of like, what if the TPA was somehow blended across time like that? There's a piece to it to be able to say.
Yeah, the alignment issue has been an issue.
I think there is meant to be,
Meant to be?
right?
Meant to
There's
be,
like
yeah.
ed code on that where you do your, they set goals and they basically bring that allegedly into their induction program.
Yeah.
But a lot of the problem is their induction program isn't always a credential program.
That's
Yeah.
right.
So I don't know if it
Or
really
the values
persists.
may not be aligned on
Yeah.
the delivering
Right.
program.
Yeah, we're not allowed to share the performance scores with the school.
And there's also
That's
other
up to them.
information they can utilize for their induction. They might bring their
Right.
supervisor feedback,
Yes.
Right.
instructor.
Exactly.
I'm less familiar with Cal TPA, so I know there's multiple cycles, and they do one, and feedback comes after the first one.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, each
Is
cycle is
it-
separate. They're not building on each
Right.
other.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but they do get feedback in that first.
They get a score on a rubric. There's 9 rubrics
Yeah.
for that first cycle. So 8 on that first cycle. So they'll get score on a rubric on a 1 through 5 scale with some text inside of each box. So yeah, there's feedback.
I mean, it's scored by external scores, just
Sure.
like
Right.
So it's
like
the same as
yeah.
the
it's,
TPA.
Yeah.
they're all
So there's a, you
large
can
scale
see it in a
testing.
rubric
Yeah, and
what
you-
you must have
You
done.
just get a score and there's a
Okay.
few things in the box.
And
that
that-
get
so
So
in
that
that-
tell you what you didn't
Yeah.
do
Yes.
to get the next one.
Yeah.
In their second draft, is there something in the rubric that accounts for how well the revisions incorporated feedback?
No.
Or
This
And
is-
also 2 cycles not, I mean, if they get a low score, they can resubmit. They have
Right.
to redo the whole process again. They
Yeah.
resubmit, and then they just get a new batch of scores.
So I just sat in a TPA cafe that one of my colleagues for her observation, she's a lecturer at our program, and she had like 50 people on black screen and something there. And she's just doing the other part of the support for the Cal TPA. And the questions that kept coming from the students were just student candidates were unbelievable. And most of them centered around videotaping, permissions, like every single thing that had nothing to do with, it was all about the anxiety around what I call construct irrelevant behavior. Like I'm so worried about everything but the teaching.
Mm.
But just put that aside for a second. You listen a little bit more and you realize, she said it again and again. We don't help you. We don't read your responses. We don't go over your drafts that you submit to Pearson. In fact, that's a violation of our duties and responsibilities as a program. So an inherent tension in any summative exam, well, maybe not Stanford, but let me tell you, we're a little bit less loosey-goosey than some of our friends.
no,
We do a lot of like, no. And so how does something become formative when somebody is told, no, I can't help you? Now, it's formative in my mind because we scaffolded pieces of it all along the way in the program. So now you're just putting them together. But that's our program. For some student teachers, it's just like, I got to make it, go to a party, and there's no feedback unless I'm in violation of that protocol. Or with my friends. I mean, think about that. I'm at a party and my friends and I are reading each other's TPAs for EdTPA and editing it. That's a violation of the rater reliability protocol. So again, we're back to, I think the design of the instrument is meant to be a summative judgment about readiness to teach. Formative would allow people to get feedback, an instructor to get feedback on the first draft of the TPA.
So
What do
we
you
have
think?
1 minute left.
Yeah.
He said 250.
2:50.
Yeah, and
So we
also
got
have
6 minutes.
two drive track together.
Is it important that we pick like a top 3 attribute? Top 5 attributes? I feel like we have a lot of things to that.
And do we want to make sure, is the definition solid?
Yeah. I thought we did some of the attributes already. Did we not?
We did
Those?
some attributes.
Right, so we're good on those, or want to go over? Let's read them again.
Attributes, okay. Equity focused, just-in-time supports, user-friendly feedback, actionable feedback, strengths-based, adaptive coaching, revision process-based, dynamic, belief among stakeholders that is doing all the things we are doing explicitly, Process of feedback from institution, alignment, uses of the TPA. I don't know why I put that, but it's what someone
So at
called
least
out.
the first
What
8
does
things you
alignment
said.
mean?
Yeah.
Alignment was one of the very first things we called out when we first started talking, is like alignment of
Yeah.
TPA. It's under,
With a
you're
little
right,
bit of
formative
time left,
nature.
can we
Yeah.
take the notes and bring them up to the level of a choice? The
Yes.
choice is going to be of those things you just read. What are the 5 or 1, 2,
Yeah.
3, 4, 5 that
Cool.
we can agree with? Hands up. We think these are the ones that should be in there.
Equity focus.
Okay, how many people think that's something that should be in the working
I
attribute
think if
definition?
it's
Or
a
talking
working
about?
attribute, it needs to say clearly, I mean, we're talking in terms of feedback is necessary for an equity focus. That's what I mean by an,
Already did that.
yeah. like
Provided targeted feedback and next steps.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
it-
so
That
does
was one of them.
that one rise higher?
Yeah, that gives it an equity focus.
So what was that one again? Just in one
Provided targeted feedback with next steps, actionable
Okay, that's an
steps.
attribute.
Wait, but you had a lot
So,
more to
look,
feedback.
I'm sorry. We're gonna do come back at 3, but this is inclusive of your break. So,
Okay,
yeah.
Thanks, Adam.
keeps moving.
Keep going, guys.
My students hate when I say that. And
Brent,
take a break
I don't
as well.
remember all that you said.
Oh, I just
but-
wrote this
It's a
here.
lot.
But I mean, the feedback, it has to help the teacher or the learner know what to do. It's gotta,
Yes.
it's gotta, it
Well,
can't,
didn't, I thought that next steps piece.
Actionable.
I don't, but I don't know.
felt
Target
weak.
doesn't suggest
Okay.
to me that
Felt
it's
weak.
giving you,
An action to do.
Yeah.
It's-
So with actionable steps, is that
Yes.
that way,
Yeah.
that's.
better phrasing?
Yeah.
Provided targeted feedback with
Target could be like,
actionables.
you suck in this area.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Well,
But that
yeah,
doesn't
maybe
give
that's
me
not a
any
good
idea
word
about
these
it.
days
Specific.
anyway. Specific is often
Specific.
used instead.
Provided
Smarter.
specific feedback with
Specific.
actionable steps.
Specific actionable steps.
Yeah.
Praise doesn't help. Punishment's not gonna work. You suck. You didn't do
Yeah.
well.
What about
I don't
adaptive
know if I
with
agree
that?
that praise doesn't help. I think.
Just what the research says. I could be totally wrong.
Okay.
Tell me your experience. What's your experience with it?
Well, not like, you can't say good job. That doesn't tell me what I did good
I
with.
don't think that's praise.
Okay, all right.
Well, Hattie would, I don't want to argue about what we know.
Okay,
What do
great.
you think? What do
Because
you,
it needs to have
it's
strengths.
worked for your
You
program.
need to talk about strengths as well as
Yeah.
any of the
And we said that
remediation.
earlier, right?
Strengths-based.
Strengths-based.
So should we add
Yeah.
that too?
I think
Strengths-based.
adaptive is what
Yeah,
is
strengths-based.
connected to what you're talking about, action. No, never mind.
I thought your list was actually pretty clear, so if we're gonna wordsmith it, that's fine, but
Oh,
what
I
was
don't
it
mind.
again? You want to read it back to us?
Sure, right now we got on top, provided specific feedback with actionable steps,
Yeah.
strengths-based, equity-focused. Are we keeping okay. Just-in-time supports.
Yeah, that's critical time. We kept talking about a bunch.
It says user-friendly feedback and actionable feedback. I
That's
feel
sort of
like we
already
kind of
there.
covered that with the very
That's
first
already
one. Adaptive.
That's
is that?
differentiation.
I don't know what that means.
What that means is I've got a student and I have them at San Jose State with very different skills, capacities, experiences with teaching anything, including 3 weeks, 2 weeks, 1 week, never. And when they go through the TPA, they are going to have different ways of being able to make progress on different
So
parts.
differentiated support.
There you go. That worked. You
Differentiated
like that?
supports.
That
Yeah,
works.
yeah. No, I understand that.
Differentiated
Or
support.
meeting the needs, supports that meet the needs
Can you
of.
give me an example? Like, what would that look like in a TPA
Well, not in, you mean in the actual tool itself or in the
Yeah.
feedback
or in the
process?
feedback?
I'll give you a
process?
great example, posing a question. I can spend 6 weeks with a student teacher in phase 1, learning to pose a open-ended question. And some
Or-
students naturally pick it up and they just kind of like go in front of a camera and they can ask questions in front of students and even listen.
What
Some
about
of them can't.
choice? Like a section for teachers to have choice in the questions that they're gonna answer or respond to.
I'm confused what we're doing now.
He's asking for.
Given
For an
examples of
example,
differentiate.
needing to differentiate teacher
Differentiation
candidates who
or
have more or
adaptive.
less challenges with particular sorts of moves that are completely implicit in this TPA, like
Oh,
asking questions versus talking for 5 minutes on the video.
so you'd have some people being scored on different rubrics.
Not scored, we're talking about
Sorry.
feedback that gets us to helping students to do a better job in high order thinking, hot. In our case it would be hot. High order thinking skills, huge
I love
challenge.
that.
So just posing questions for a teacher candidate requires the ability to link it to
Mhm.
hot.
That's what Paris told me. Love that.
For the dog
That's-
too,
yeah.
both dogs.
It's
So
a
you want an example, Matt? That's the
Couples
best I can
reference
do
there.
for Cal TPA
Okay.
and differentiating
All right.
among a group of people who are
Okay.
sitting in my program.
I'll I'm not saying don't write. I'm just gonna think about that.
What do you call
Do
it? Differentiated, something
Support?
adapt?
differentiated supports as well.
Maybe that's just part of feedback. I don't know. Could be. Just leave it back in feedback, let it sync back to that.
Okay.
It could
No,
be.
because by nature, by
I'm just
nature,
taking notes.
feedback would be
Yeah.
differentiated.
Trying to,
Where would be? by
Yeah,
nature.
I mean, feedback is
So let it be.
differentiated. I mean,
feedback is differentiated
So
based
let's
off
go
of
to
the project.
minimum
you're
one.
trying to-
you
yeah.
know,
Yes.
you can't give.
It could be, or it could be
Oh, right,
Generic.
a
right,
structure
yeah, I see.
of the, of the
Yeah.
performance.
To be fair, you
So
both
it
gave
does
different
need-
examples. This was a differentiated
Yeah.
support example. If you're using choice, feedback would automatically be differentiated based off what the candidate did, right?
It would
Thank
have
you,
to be,
Lisa,
yeah,
for
so
that.
maybe it's worth saying it,
Okay.
yeah.
Choice
But-
or modality, you could
Yeah.
even say.
It's something we
right?
talk a lot about
Because
for
it's
students.
specific,
Yeah.
specific to the student there, that's what we mean by differentiate.
So how many attributes do we have?
We have
Pulling out the
a,
attributes.
so we made it through the first 5.
Oh, that's not bad.
Underneath that, we have coaching, revision process based, like revision or processed based.
Right.
Dynamic, which was like when we were talking about the when conversation, right?
Yeah. I would have to say that the revision thing is for me the big sticking point too, and the research on formative in nature. How's anything formative in nature if you can't rethink it, redo it, rewrite it, re-say it? The whole point of I always thought formative was re. And so many of these tools are not re, they don't allow any re
Mhm.
unless you fail. And then you redo it. So
Yeah,
how do we
but-
deal with that?
Well, I think no matter where you are, formative feedback is not for the people who don't get it. It's for everyone, no matter where you are in your journey on becoming the best teacher you can possibly be. So the assumption shouldn't be that if you're above this cutoff, you're free to go, and if you're below, you have to do your revise. And I think it should be embedded in there that there's it's
Everyone.
expected that you do something with the feedback that you get.
Right.
Opportunities to utilize.
Yeah. I think that's what it's again going back
Not,
to
but
what you
not
said.
part of a,
Being
I don't know, I guess, but my thought is that, well, people are gonna come back and say, yeah, that's what the induction program does, and that's not what I'm talking about,
That
right?
disposition needs to be in there first.
I think you brought up a really important point, and maybe it's something that needs to be in that first piece about like life. I mean, we all know as teachers that we have got better and better, hopefully, every year because we do something, we do something different. We've improved it. We've thought about it. We're lifelong developing our teaching skills, and that's what formative is about. And so maybe it's the beginning that recognizing that teaching development is an endless task. And
that's a skill you want. I mean, that's what administrators want.
Right,
They're
right.
like,
Everyone
"Oh,
wants-
they're gonna
well,
get
it's
feedback."
in the
that
frame of
that can
the
only happen if you're getting formative feedback.
Right.
Like, it can't happen, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. It can happen because your class is going crazy and I think, hang on, I can't teach it this way again because all the kids in this class are crazy. So I need to do something because I'm the one who's making them crazy, right? And so that's feedback of the sort. It's not the one we want, but we want, principals going in and observing. And
And
I want to zoom up again, Matt, go and then I
Oh, I
want
was
to.
just gonna say, I think for me in an ideal situation, not only should there be a revision, but teachers should be, as part of a rubric somewhere, should be acknowledged for making growth based on that feedback. So maybe my strength isn't that I'm awesome from day one, but maybe my strength is I'm constantly working and improving my craft, maybe piece by piece, bit by bit. But if that's my strength, I'm missing out on this the TPA rather, not because I'm not improving, but because this is not captured yet.
because you don't know.
Yeah.
So I'm having to facilitate, but I'm also looking for the cue. Can somebody put the cue together for me and just point? I know we're going fast.
Can I just say, like, a
There she
premise of
goes.
a continuum of practice has to be a part of it. It's like,
Say one more time.
there's like a premise that there's a continuum of
Con-
practice,
yeah.
and
Well,
this is
yeah, I think,
Right.
situated within it.
I think what I wanted to attach to the actionable steps in the continuum thing is the reflective piece, right? Because it's interesting for me in my work with both very novice and struggling teachers. There can be the reflection piece with action plans and whatnot. But if there's not action attached to that, then it's just words on the page, right?
Yeah.
So like I think that's important as well. It's like if there's some type of like continuous reflecting with.
So the frame of the
revision,
state of
right?
California is continuous improvement
Yeah.
in every single location for every single person, including administrators, teachers, students. But I'm wondering if it's more than that, because actually, Matt, I would have framed what I didn't never saw in the TPA, because it's not a kind of instrument that could be that, there's no progress variable. There's no
No,
actual
it's not
progress
growth.
notion. You mentioned continuum, right? That's another way to say it. There's no actual concrete acknowledgement that progress occurs at different rates with different folks. Is that formative in nature? Absolutely. It's formative when it is in fact progress oriented, depending on where you're at this moment. How do we get there?
Just in time.
Just, yeah.
Right.
So I almost feel like we have to sort of say progress or continuous improvement or some signal to this group that if the thing is really summative, just benchmarking 1, 2, 3, 4s.
Yeah.
It's not actually progress around growth over each of these areas over time.
Over time.
Do we want to be clear, speaking of which, do we want to be clear as an attribute that scores are backgrounded or not included? I mean, I know we were talking about that earlier about
Yeah.
including them on there sort of diminishes the
Sort of recognizing
the
that-
power of the
yeah.
feedback, I guess. I don't know. My only thought, sorry, I'm taking a lot of airtime. I don't know, what other people feel about feedback being personalized or personable feedback? It seems like if you're just clicking a box and it generates a text for you.
That's always going to be a
it doesn't-
checkbox at that point.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's great. When
That seems
personalizing
sorta-
is very important too.
Um,
It's heavy load though, for a system.
well, for $300, I think you should get
Have AI
something
do it for
more.
you.
Yeah,
Cheaper
well,
$300,
hey,
frankly, it's going there.
We're almost
I mean, we're just, the whole thing in the room for me is AI. It's this whole talk is so funny because people are going to start generating much of their work
yeah.
using AI, and they're going to find ways to generate very generic sorts of responses to check the boxes.
Right.
But we'll throw that to the side, go back to the real world, which is here.
Can I
So
read the
yeah, let's read
definition?
those. Let's get those out.
Definition
Let's
first,
play.
okay? So
We're close.
definition, an essential attribute is that at its core, formative in nature. An essential attribute is that at its core, it is designed for formative purposes more so than summative purposes. By design, it should be a process where feedback is articulated, transparent, user-friendly, and actionable. And then underneath attributes. So is there anything to change on definition?
That's good.
Cool.
Yeah.
Attributes, provided specific feedback with actionable steps, strengths-based, equity-focused, just-in-time supports, differentiated supports, continuous revision, continuum of practice, and
Reflection.
process-based to demonstrate growth. I count them. Progress-based, dynamic, and personalized feedback.
Nice.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
And I would,
Capture it.
very good. And Lisa, I would add, you said reflection. You said
I-
reflection.
Reflective.
We got it?
Yeah,
Yeah, we got it right close. Yeah.
Cool, done. I'm gonna put this on the
Nice.
slide and
That's
send it
good.
in.